Facebook Live. I'm going to preference this by saying it's aimed at adults. Viewers' discretion is needed because I'm talking about, the consequences to mental health of being raised in an authoritarian household. That's parents who are very strict and could have used violence to control you. So please be aware that as I talk, you may receive flashbacks or bad memories may surface for you. So please, use your discerning nature and decide for yourself whether you want to actually watch this or not. Some people will and some people won't want to do it. So it's going to be up to you, okay? Now, as I said, this is aimed at adults. And it's for people who've already grown up in this environment. We're just going to talk about the characteristics of being raised in a strict environment, what they look like. The list is by no means complete. I am only scratching the surface on this particular topic, and then the mental health issues that can arise as well, can be very complex. So let's get going. Have you ever wondered what happened? I was raised in a too strict an environment. My parents were authoritarian. So what happened? What happened to my mental health? How has that impacted me? We know from research that parenting styles can impact a child's mental and physical health. And it's the most important relationship for that we develop as children, and it does dictate all other relationships as we grow throughout the rest of our lives. So, what are the characteristics of this kind of a relationship? And as I said, this list is by no means complete, so you may add your own in here. But it's to spark the conversation if that's what you want to do. The first one is lots of rules, and there's no exception to those rules. So there's no evaluating the circumstances. You had to follow the rules very strictly. If you went outside those rules, then you were punished. The circumstances as to why you may have diverted from the rules was never considered. You were punished. The expectation bar, expectations were very high. And that bar may kept going up and up and up and up. You were up against it all the time. Lots of restrictions. So a very narrow world. You may or may not have been allowed to play with certain children, for instance. You may have only been allowed to go to school or have, certain things you were allowed to do. And this has happened to people. The second thing, I'm kind of slipping onto the second thing there, there's no room for fun or downtime or play, or relaxing. That is what children need. They need that. But there was no room for fun. The fun, was supposed to come from achieving the academic results, from full focus on learning, from highly structured time as to what was done. Maybe you had to, work in the family business. Maybe you had to after school or, but everything was structured. So maybe you did get the piano practice, or you did the horse riding, or you did, things that people would go, God, I'd love to have tried those. But your time was very, very structured, and you had to have high achievement in whatever you did. And if you didn't, there are consequences. The message you received was, you weren't meeting the standard, you weren't good enough. Number 3, people raised in this kind of environment tend to have learned to lie easily. And the reason they learn, and I'm not saying kids don't lie, of course they do. They try it. They do try it. And there's no harm in that. It's a white lie generally. But kids raised in this environment are very good at lying. And they learned this because it was to prevent them being punished. And the punishments were usually very severe, usually involved violence. And it was, the slightest or even the perceived deviation from the rules was punished severely. So there was no room for mistakes at all. Absolutely none at all. Number 4, constant nagging criticism had to keep that parent happy. Always, 100% of the time, that parent had to be kept happy, no matter what they wanted. So a lot of toxic guilt, a lot of toxic shame was used to control here. So you were told, when and where and how to do something. You didn't learn, as children need to, how to take responsibility and learn by mistakes. We all do that. That's what we're supposed to do. But there was no room for that. There was a way to do it, and that was the way to do it. So if the dishwasher had to be loaded in it, or the dishes had to be washed in a certain way, then that's the way they were washed. There was no room for learning at all, and learning from those mistakes. Number 5 would be, no praise for how well you did. It was only on the outcome. So the outcome was important. As I said, winning awards if you had extracurricular activities, or the straight A's, anything less than, 99 to 100% was no. All that mattered. That was all that mattered, was making sure the family looked good, particularly once you went outside that door, and that you were achieving and winning no matter what you were allowed to do, and you were told what you were to do. Then that meant you only got appraised for those awards, for those straight A's. The message there is that you're not good enough as a person. Just you as a human being, the way you are, is never good enough. So that was a message that would have been received there. And number 6, that brings me on to choice. No choice is allowed. The parent chooses what the child can do. They're not, the authoritarian parents are known as drill sergeants, so they bark out orders. But there is no freedom to choose there with somebody like that. So therefore, if you've no freedom to choose, again, you can't make mistakes. You can't take responsibility because you can't learn. And you've low self-esteem issues definitely will arise there. Number 7, there's a possibility that you are listening also to that parent constantly criticizing maybe the other parent, or friends, family, the teacher, the school, their boss, employees, whatever it was constant criticism of everybody else couldn't get it right. And having to listen to that toxic negativity where nobody gets it right puts you on edge, and it's like, am I going to be next? Am I good enough? And the answer is usually yes, you're going to be next, and always will be. And no, you're not good enough. You're just not good enough for the parent. You'll never get it right. You'll be a failure. You're a failure. That's what you're being told there. So as you can see, that's just 7 things I've talked about there. All of those build up throughout your childhood, because this parent isn't going to change, who they are, for the most part. And, it impacts our mental health then, as teens and as adults, and for the rest of your life, really, until you do get help, reach out and get help. Generally, as adults, will follow the rules. People that are raised in that environment will follow the rules. Now, I'm not just talking about the rules of society here. I'm talking about they'll follow rules, but it's going to cost them. So you'll see things like being a people person, people pleasing, perfectionism here. They're afraid to say no. No boundaries. Or the boundaries are very unhealthy, skewed boundaries, low self-esteem, a lot of inner self dialogue, the cognitive distortions, as we call it, are very negative. So this is all going on in your head. Other issues will be high stress levels, high anxiety levels, high risk of depression, high risk towards substance abuse and eating disorders is also there. Anger, difficulties in expressing anger. So they'll have a lot of difficulty in expressing their anger. The root is generally in being angry with their parent. in, being angry at that parent. But because of the way the parent was, they were so domineering that they're even now as adults afraid to express their emotions of any kind to anyone. And they have problems expressing their emotions, particularly anger, appropriately. So you could see a lot of passive aggressive mannerisms there, or you could see somebody who is prone to lashing out themselves, and repeating some of the patterns of that parent, that authoritarian parent. So hostility and lashing out. Um, there's also a struggle around responsibility. Again, this can go two ways. One, you can be overly responsible and take responsibility for everything, even if it's not your responsibility and not your fault. You'll apologize constantly and take responsibility for it. Or you won't. You just will not take responsibility at all, and you'll try and shift the blame onto somebody else. That can be one of two ways you can struggle with responsibility there. So as I said, that I'm only tipping the iceberg on a lot of these. I could talk about, and I have done, on depression and anxiety and stress, and I've talked about substance abuse, alcohol and drugs and gambling. I've talked about the various eating disorders. There's videos on all of those, and they're all linked in this week's blog. The thing I would say to you here is therapy is vital for you, and reaching out for help. Of course, an awful lot of the time we don't realize how impacted we've been by our childhood until a crisis occurs, and then we go to our GP and we get referred, or we can self-refer for therapy ourselves. But you can get the ball rolling if you're waiting for therapy. You can start reducing your own stress levels, your anxiety levels, but you will need support and help with setting healthy boundaries, learning to say no to people, deleting negative people from your life, and that can be quite hard, and dealing with your own inner negative thinking. If you have issues around substance abuse, if you've issues with depression, please go and see your GP and get referred on to services. But you can look after yourself. You can start to take even small amounts of responsibility and look after your basic self-care, and as I said, reduce your stress. Have compassion for yourself. That's vital. Having compassion for yourself is vital in this situation. You're doing the best you can with what you were taught. So please do that. And reach out for help. You can also book an appointment with me. So all of that, booking an appointment with me, link to the original blog. More information, as always, is in the blog. I can only tip on so much of it in the videos. And links out to join me in my free group where we do talk about boundaries and negative thinking, and how to say no to people, and deleting or dealing with negative people and your negative thinking. I do all those courses, free courses there, if you wanted to get started or you wanted to do them in conjunction with your own therapist. But they're all linked in the description below, or you can check them out at www.deborahbyrnepsychologyservices.com. So I will leave it there.